before muscle cars ruled the streets, there was nothing. Then in 1964, three engineers broke every rule in Detroit and created a legend that would change American automotive history forever. Some cars follow trends, others create entire movements. The Pontiac GTO didn't just start the muscle car era, it invented the concept, defied corporate America, and became the blueprint for every performance car that followed. This is the story of how a rebellious idea became an automotive revolution, dominated the streets for nearly a decade, and then vanished almost overnight. This is the rise and fall of the car that started it all. To understand the GTO's significance, you need to understand what American cars looked like in the early 1960s. Detroit was building land yachts, massive chrome-laden sedans with soft suspensions and anemic engines. Performance was a dirty word. Safety was becoming the rallying cry of consumer advocates. And the youth market, the buyers who would define the next generation of automotive enthusiasm, was largely ignored by manufacturers who focused on selling family transportation to suburban parents. General Motors, the largest corporation in America, had strict rules about performance. The corporate edict was clear and inflexible. No intermediate-sized car could be equipped with an engine larger than 330 cubic inches. The reasoning was multi-layered. Insurance companies were already nervous about young drivers in powerful cars. Safety advocates were gaining political influence. And GM's conservative leadership genuinely believed that selling high-performance cars to young people was irresponsible and potentially dangerous to the corporation's image. The rule was designed to prevent exactly the kind of car that would become the GTO. But rules, as three Pontiac engineers were about to prove, were made to be broken. John DeLorean was Pontiac's chief engineer in 1963, and he was nothing like the typical GM executive. Young, charismatic, and ambitious, DeLorean understood that Pontiac needed to shed its stodgy image and connect with younger buyers. The brand had historically been GM's old man's car, appealing to conservative buyers who wanted something slightly upscale from Chevrolet, but couldn't afford a Cadillac. That demographic was dying literally, and Pontiac's sales reflected the problem. The brand needed youth, excitement, and relevance. Working with DeLorean were Bill Collins, the chief engineer, and Russ G., a staff engineer who understood that young buyers wanted performance but couldn't afford Corvettes. Together, this trio hatched a plan that was brilliant in its simplicity and audacious in its defiance of corporate rules. They would take the Tempest, Pontiac's compact intermediate car, and stuff it full of the biggest engine they could physically fit. Then they'd market it not as transportation, but as pure performance, affordable speed for young buyers who wanted to go fast. The loophole was elegant. GM's rule prohibited intermediate cars from having big engines as standard equipment, but there was nothing in the rulebook about option packages. So the team created the GTO as an option package, technically a trim level rather than a distinct model. The RPO, or regular production option, was coded as Option Package 224, and it transformed the mild-mannered Tempest into something entirely different. For just $295 above the base Tempest price, buyers could order a car with a monster engine, heavy-duty suspension, dual exhausts, and performance pretensions that outraged corporate executives when they finally discovered what Pontiac had done. The engine was Pontiac's 389 cubic inch V8, borrowed from the full-size Bonneville and Catalina models. In base form, it produced 325 horsepower, though like most GM engines of the era, that number was deliberately conservative to manage insurance costs. With the optional tri-power carburetor setup, 3 two-barrel carburetors feeding the hungry V8, output jumped to 348 horsepower. The real numbers were probably higher, with dynamometer testing suggesting the tri-power cars were making closer to 400 horses at the flywheel. The 389 was a torque monster, producing a staggering 428 pound-feet of twist that could overwhelm the rear tires at virtually any speed. It breathed through cast-iron heads with generous ports, exhaled through dual exhausts with a distinctive burble, and transformed the Tempest from economy car to street terror. The suspension was upgraded with stiffer springs and shocks. The brakes were improved, though they remained marginal for the car's performance capabilities. And the entire package weighed just 3,300 pounds, giving it a power-to-weight ratio that embarrassed cars costing twice as much. But here's where the genius really showed: the name. GTO stood for Gran Turismo Omologato, borrowed directly from Ferrari's legendary 250 GTO. In Italian motorsports, that designation meant a car had been homologated for racing, built in sufficient numbers to qualify for competition. Ferrari's GTO was one of the most beautiful and successful racing cars ever created, winning championships and commanding prices that put it far beyond normal buyers. Pontiac's use of the name was audacious, cheeky, and borderline insulting to Ferrari purists. But it worked perfectly, associating the affordable Pontiac with European racing pedigree and giving young buyers a connection to exotic performance. Ferrari wasn't amused. Enzo Ferrari himself reportedly called the Pontiac GTO an affront to Italian automotive heritage. But by the time Ferrari's lawyers sent cease and desist letters, the GTO was already a phenomenon in America. Pontiac eventually worked out a quiet arrangement with Ferrari, agreeing to certain restrictions on marketing language, but the name stuck and became iconic. When the 1964 GTO hit showrooms in October of 1963, initial expectations were modest. Pontiac's management, still nervous about corporate backlash, authorized production of just 5,000 units. They figured they'd sell those to hardcore enthusiasts and move on. They were catastrophically wrong. Buyers lined up at dealerships, checkbooks in hand, desperate to own this new kind of car. Young buyers traded in their imports and older American cars. Performance enthusiasts who'd been waiting for Detroit to build something exciting finally had their machine. And word spread through the automotive community like wildfire. Pontiac had built something special. What they didn't realize was that the GTO wasn't just a car, it was a cultural revolution on four wheels. By the end of the 1964 model year, Pontiac had sold 32,000 GTOs. It was a sensation that exceeded every internal projection and caught competitors completely flat-footed. Ford, Chevrolet, Chrysler, none of them had anything comparable. The GTO had created an entirely new market segment, and Pontiac owned it exclusively for nearly a year. The muscle car era had officially begun, and the GTO was king. The automotive press went absolutely wild. Car and Driver ran a cover story calling the GTO the first of a new breed. Motor Trend praised its performance and value proposition. Road and Track, typically dismissive of American performance cars, admitted the GTO was genuinely quick and surprisingly fun to drive. Quarter-mile times were in the low 15-second range for stock cars, with trap speeds around 95 miles per hour. With the tri-power option and a skilled driver, times dropped into the high 14s. These were numbers that matched or exceeded European sports cars, costing 3 or 4 times as much. But the numbers only told part of the story. The GTO felt special in ways that transcended specifications. The engine's soundtrack was intoxicating. A deep rumble at idle that built to a roar under acceleration. The tri-power setup created a distinctive surge as the outboard carburetors opened up, dumping fuel into the engine and unleashing a wave of torque that could break the rear tires loose in third gear. The steering was heavy but communicative. The ride was firm but not punishing, and the overall experience felt rebellious, like you were getting away with something Detroit wasn't supposed to build. The tri-power system deserves special attention because it represented the pinnacle of carburetor technology before fuel injection became standard. The center carburetor provided fuel during normal driving, maintaining reasonable economy and drivability. Under light throttle, the GTO could actually return decent mileage for its era, around 14 or 15 miles per gallon on the highway. But when you buried the throttle, progressive linkage opened the outboard carburetors, flooding the engine with fuel and air. The sensation was addictive, a secondary surge of power that arrived with a distinctive mechanical howl as 6 barrels worked in concert to feed the hungry V8. The 1965 GTO arrived with evolutionary improvements that refined the formula without abandoning what made it special. The styling was cleaned up with stacked headlights that gave the car a more aggressive face. The dashboard was redesigned with better instrumentation. And most significantly, the engine lineup expanded. The base 389 remained at 335 horsepower. Pontiac had bumped the rating by 10 horses through minor improvements. The tri-power option continued at 360 horsepower, but now there was a third choice for the truly committed. A high compression, high output version with hotter camshaft and improved breathing. that made 360 horsepower without the complexity of 3 carburetors. Sales exploded. Pontiac moved 75,000 GTOs in 1965, making it one of the best-selling performance cars in American history. The GTO had become a cultural phenomenon, appearing in magazines, movies, and songs. Jan and Dean recorded Little GTO, a hit single that celebrated the car and cemented its place in American popular culture. The song's lyrics captured the essence of what made the GTO special. It was fast, affordable, and undeniably cool. Young people who couldn't recite the Constitution could tell you the exact specifications of a tri-power GTO. The dealer network became crucial to the GTO's success. Savvy Pontiac dealers recognized they were selling more than just transportation. They were selling dreams and status. Dealerships began hosting car shows and cruise nights, creating communities around the GTO ownership experience. Performance-oriented dealers worked with customers to maximize their car's capabilities, sometimes suggesting modifications or tweaks that pushed performance even further. Some dealers established relationships with local speed shops, creating unofficial performance networks that supported GTO owners long after the initial purchase. The aftermarket industry exploded around the GTO almost immediately. Companies like Hearst developed shifters specifically designed for Pontiac applications. Edelbrock created intake manifolds that improved airflow beyond factory specifications. Hooker headers built exhaust systems that liberated additional horsepower while creating an even more aggressive exhaust note. This ecosystem of suppliers recognized that GTO owners were willing to invest in their cars, constantly seeking incremental improvements that would give them an edge over competitors at the stoplight or drag strip. By 1966, the competition had caught up. Chevrolet introduced the Chevelle SS with big block power. Ford countered with the Fairlane GT. Plymouth launched the Satellite with Hemi options. Dodge offered the Coronet RT. The muscle car wars were fully engaged, with every manufacturer scrambling to capture a piece of the market that Pontiac had created. But the GTO remained the benchmark, the car that all others were measured against. The 66 GTO received another styling update that many enthusiasts consider the best-looking iteration of the first generation. The body lines were smoother and more integrated. The chrome trim was reduced for a cleaner appearance, and the overall proportions were perfect. Aggressive without being cartoonish, muscular without being excessive. Under the hood, the 389 continued with minor improvements, but the real news was the increasing availability of performance options. Buyers could now order their GTOS with limited slip differentiations, upgraded cooling systems, heavy-duty transmissions, and various axle ratios to optimize performance for street or strip. Sales reached 96,000 units in 1966, the highest single-year total the GTO would ever achieve. The car had transcended its origins as a clever option package and become a cultural icon. It appeared in racing, dominating NHRA stock classes and making a name for itself in SCCA road racing. Professional drivers praised its combination of power and balance, and on the streets, the GTO was king, the car that defined cool for an entire generation. The street racing culture of the mid-60s embraced the GTO completely. On Friday and Saturday nights, GTOs would line up on boulevards from California to New York, challenging anything that dared pull alongside. The GTO's combination of low-end torque and strong mid-range power made it deadly in stoplight-to-stoplight racing, the most common form of street competition. Experienced drivers learned to slip the clutch just right, balancing wheel spin against forward momentum, launching the car hard enough to win without breaking traction completely. The 4-speed manual transmission was the weapon of choice, though automatic-equipped GTOs with the right gearing could be brutally effective as well. The 1967 model represented the pinnacle of the first-generation GTO. The styling was refined to near perfection, with a more aggressive nose, improved aerodynamics, and details that showed Pontiac's designers had learned from 3 years of evolution. The interior was upgraded with better materials and more comfortable seats, and the engine options expanded again with the availability of ram air induction, functional hood scoops that forced cold air directly into the carburetor for measurable power gains. But the first generation ended after 67, and Pontiac faced a critical decision. The GTO had been wildly successful, selling over 200,000 units across 4 model years and establishing Pontiac as GM's performance division. But the market was changing. Insurance companies were becoming hostile to muscle cars, raising rates to punishing levels. Safety advocates were gaining political power, and competitors were offering increasingly powerful alternatives. The GTO needed to evolve or risk becoming irrelevant. The 1968 GTO represented a complete redesign, moving to the A-body platform and featuring styling that was simultaneously more modern and more controversial. The body was curvier, more sculptural, with an emphasis on flowing lines rather than sharp angles. The Coke bottle profile was pronounced, with dramatically flared rear fenders that emphasized width and power. Some enthusiasts loved the new look, finding it more sophisticated and contemporary. Others missed the aggressive simplicity of the first generation. Under the hood, significant changes reflected the evolving performance landscape. The venerable 389 cubic inch engine was retired, replaced by a new 400 cubic inch of V8 that provided more displacement and power potential. The base version made 350 horsepower, while the Ram Air versions climbed to 366 horsepower in various states of tune. Once again, these numbers were conservative. Real output was significantly higher, with the Ram Air 4 edition probably making well over 400 horsepower in actual testing. The 400 cubic inch engine transformed the GTO's character. The additional displacement provided even more torque, with peak numbers exceeding 445 pound-feet. The engine pulled strongly from low RPM, making the car feel effortlessly fast in everyday driving. With the Ram Air setup, the 400 became a genuine race engine that could propel the GTO through the quarter mile in the high 13s with a skilled driver. Some magazine testers managed to break into the low 30s with perfect conditions and aggressive driving. Sales remained strong in '68, with over 87,000 GTOs finding homes. But cracks were appearing in the foundation. Insurance rates were skyrocketing, particularly for young male drivers who represented the GTO's core demographic. A 21-year-old trying to insure a Ram Air GTO could face annual premiums exceeding $2,000, more than the monthly payment on the car itself. Some insurance companies simply refused to write policies for certain muscle cars, forcing buyers to lie about modifications or seek coverage through high-risk pools at astronomical rates. The insurance crisis affected every aspect of muscle car culture. Some buyers registered their GTOs in their parents' names to get lower rates. Others claimed their cars had smaller engines than actually installed, gambling that insurance companies wouldn't discover the deception unless a major claim occurred. And many potential buyers simply walked away, recognizing that the total cost of ownership made the GTO financially impossible despite its attractive sticker price. The insurance industry was systematically destroying the market that the GTO had created. The 1969 model year brought the Judge variant, which we've discussed in detail elsewhere. But the standard GTO continued with refinements that addressed some of the previous year's criticisms while pushing performance even further. The Ram Air 3 and Ram Air 4 engines were now both available, offering buyers a choice between strong street performance and all-out racing capability. The suspension was improved with better damping and more sophisticated geometry, and the styling received minor updates that cleaned up some of the busy details from the '68 model. But the cultural tide was turning against muscle cars. The Woodstock generation was questioning American values, including the gas-guzzling performance cars that symbolized excess and environmental irresponsibility. The first Earth Day would be celebrated in 1970, bringing environmental concerns into mainstream consciousness, and politicians were beginning to craft legislation that would fundamentally change automotive regulations, from emission standards to safety requirements, that would add weight and complexity to future cars. The 1970 GTO represented both the peak and the beginning of the end. The styling was arguably the best of the second generation, with a more aggressive front end, functional Ram Air scoops, and details that communicated serious performance intentions. The engines continued with minor improvements, though compression ratios were starting to drop in anticipation of unleaded fuel requirements. The 400 cubic inch V8 was still available in various tunes, with the Ram Air 4 remaining the ultimate street option for buyers who wanted maximum performance. But sales began declining. Pontiac moved just under 41,000 GTOs in 1970, less than half the peak numbers from just 4 years earlier. The reasons were complex and interconnected. Insurance was pricing young buyers out of the market. Gas prices were rising, making the GTO's fuel consumption of around 10 miles per gallon increasingly expensive. The car's performance image was becoming a liability rather than an asset as cultural attitudes shifted toward environmental consciousness and away from conspicuous consumption. The 1971 model year brought devastation disguised as evolution. The GTO continued with the same basic body, but everything that made it special was being systematically destroyed by federal regulations and corporate cowardice. Compression ratios dropped from 10.5 to 1 to 8.5 to 1 to accommodate lower octane unleaded fuel. The horsepower ratings, now measured using the more honest SAE net standard rather than the optimistic gross figures, showed the brutal truth. The 455 cubic inch engine that was now optional made just 325 net horsepower, strong by normal standards but a shadow of what the GTO had been just 3 years earlier. The performance was still decent, but the magic was gone. The engine didn't sound the same, didn't feel the same, didn't respond the same. The throaty roar had been muffled by restrictive exhaust systems designed to meet emission standards. The instant throttle response was dulled by smog equipment and lower compression. Quarter-mile times had slipped into the mid-15-second range, no better than a loaded family sedan from the early 60s. The GTO was dying, and everyone knew it. Sales collapsed to just 10,000 units in 1971. The muscle car era was over, killed by a combination of insurance costs, fuel prices, emissions regulations, and changing cultural attitudes. Buyers who once lined up for GTOs were now shopping for fuel-efficient imports or practical family cars. The young enthusiasts who had made the GTO a phenomenon were aging, starting families, and changing priorities. And new generations of buyers had different values, caring more about economy and practicality than straight-line speed. The 1972 GTO lingered like a ghost, a nameplate attached to a car that bore little resemblance to the revolution that had started just 8 years earlier. Sales dropped to just 5,700 units. The performance options were shadows of former glory, and Pontiac management knew the end was near. In 1973, Pontiac made a decision that enraged purists but reflected cold economic reality. The GTO was demoted from standalone model to option package on the compact Ventura, a badge-engineered version of the Chevrolet Nova. The GTO name was slapped on a small, economy-oriented car with a 250 cubic inch inline six-cylinder engine as base power. Even with the optional 350 cubic inch V8, the Ventura GTO was a sad joke, a cynical attempt to trade on a legendary name without any of the substance that made it matter. Only 4,700 Ventura GTOs were built before Pontiac mercifully killed the nameplate after 1974. The GTO was dead, a victim of forces beyond any single manufacturer's control. The muscle car era had ended not with a bang, but with a whimper, a once glorious nameplate reduced to marketing deception and badge engineering. The cultural impact of the GTO's rise and fall extended far beyond just automotive enthusiasts. The car represented American optimism, excess, and power at its zenith in the mid-60s. It symbolized a time when performance and freedom mattered more than efficiency and responsibility. The GTO's decline paralleled America's broader cultural shifts, the end of post-war prosperity, the beginning of energy consciousness, the rise of consumer protection movements, and the general questioning of values that had defined the previous generation. For decades after its death, the GTO remained in automotive purgatory, too recent to be considered classic, too old to be considered modern, and carrying baggage from an era that many wanted to forget. Insurance companies still charge premium rates for vintage GTOs. Parts were expensive and increasingly scarce, and younger generations, raised on fuel-efficient imports and front-wheel drive economy cars, couldn't understand what made the GTO special. But slowly, inevitably, nostalgia began building. The people who had wanted GTOs when they were young but couldn't afford them or couldn't get insurance eventually reached ages where money and insurance were no longer obstacles. They began seeking out the cars of their youth, willing to pay significant premiums for clean examples. Collectors recognized the GTO's historical significance as the car that started the muscle car movement, and restoration shops developed expertise in rebuilding these machines to better-than-new condition. By the 1990s, the GTO had been rehabilitated in the collector car market. First-generation cars, particularly the 64 through 67 models, began commanding serious money. Tri-power cars were especially desirable, with documented examples selling for $50,000 or more. Second-generation cars, especially the 68 through 70 models with Ram air engines, also appreciated significantly. The Judge variants became particularly collectible, their outrageous styling and limited production numbers making them rare and desirable. The values continued climbing through the 2000s and 2010s. Today, a pristine 1964 GTO tri-power convertible can sell for over $200,000 at major auctions. Even hardtop models in excellent condition command six-figure prices. The Ram Air 4 cars from 1969 and 70 are similarly valuable, with the best examples pushing toward $200,000 or more. The GTO had transformed from automotive pariah to blue-chip investment, proof that historical significance eventually trumps temporary fashion. Pontiac attempted to revive the GTO nameplate in 2004, importing a rebadged Holden Monaro from Australia and selling it as the new GTO. The car was genuinely good. It had an LS1 V8 making 350 horsepower, handled competently, and offered strong performance for reasonable money, but it never captured the magic of the original. The styling was generic and anonymous, lacking the visual drama that made the classic GTO instantly recognizable. The performance was strong but refined, missing the raw, barely controlled violence of the original. And most importantly, it wasn't rebellious. Sales were disappointing, and the revival was discontinued after 2006. Pontiac itself would be dead just 4 years later, killed by General Motors during the bankruptcy restructuring of 2010. The brand that had created the muscle car era, that had defined performance for an entire generation, was erased from existence like it had never mattered. The factories closed, the dealers were shuttered, and 84 years of automotive history vanished into corporate memory. But the original GTO remains, preserved in collections, driven at shows, and treasured by enthusiasts who understand its significance. It represents a moment in American history when rules were meant to be broken, when passion mattered more than caution, and when three engineers with a crazy idea could change an entire industry. The GTO proved that sometimes the best ideas come from defying conventional wisdom, that corporate rules exist to be challenged, and that genuine enthusiasm can overcome bureaucratic inertia. The technical innovations pioneered by the GTO influenced automotive design for decades. The concept of offering high-performance packages on mainstream platforms became industry standard, used by every manufacturer to varying degrees of success. The marketing approach, targeting young buyers with affordable performance, became the blueprint for performance car marketing through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Even the option package strategy that DeLorean used to circumvent GM's rules became a template for future rule breakers throughout the industry. The GTO also demonstrated the power of emotional design and marketing. The car succeeded not because it was the fastest or most advanced, but because it made people feel something. The name, borrowed from Ferrari, gave buyers a connection to exotic performance. The styling, aggressive and purposeful, communicated speed even when parked. The engine's sound and fury created an experience that transcended mere transportation. Modern performance cars, with their refinement and sophistication, deliver objectively better performance. But few create the same emotional connection that the GTO established. The aftermarket industry that grew around the GTO created economic benefits far beyond the original sale price. Speed shops developed performance parts specifically for Pontiac engines. Wheel manufacturers created designs that complemented the GTO's styling. Exhaust companies crafted systems that enhanced the distinctive Pontiac sound. This ecosystem of suppliers and specialists created jobs, generated revenue, and established expertise that benefited the broader automotive community. The racing heritage of the GTO also deserves recognition. While it was primarily a street car, the GTO competed successfully in various forms of motorsport. In NHRA stock and super stock classes, GTOs set records and won championships. In SCCA road racing, they proved that American muscle cars could do more than just go straight. And in countless unsanctioned street races across America, they established reputations that became legends passed down through generations of enthusiasts. The documentation and history surrounding significant GTOs has become its own industry. Pontiac Historical Services provides authentication services, verifying original specifications and equipment for collectors willing to pay for certainty. Numbers matching GTOs with documented histories command premium prices over cars with questionable provenance. Restoration shops specializing in Pontiacs can rebuild a GTO to factory specifications, though the cost often exceeds $100,000 for complete frame-off restorations. The GTO community remains vibrant decades after the last new car was sold. National clubs organize events and conventions where hundreds of GTOs gather. Online forums contain decades of accumulated knowledge about maintenance, restoration, and modification. Regional groups organize cruises and shows, keeping these cars on the road and visible to new generations. The passion that created the GTO in 1964 continues among the people who preserve and celebrate it today. The Pontiac GTO changed everything. It proved that rules were meant to be challenged, that passion could overcome bureaucracy, and that sometimes the best ideas come from people willing to risk their careers for something they believe in. It created an entire automotive segment that defined a generation, influenced competitors for decades, and left a legacy that continues today in every performance car on the market. From nothing, three engineers created a revolution. For nearly a decade, the GTO was king, and when it fell fighting against forces no single car could overcome. The muscle car era died, but the GTO never will. Which would you rather own? A car that followed the rules, or the car that broke them all and changed automotive history forever? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you believe some ideas are worth fighting for, hit subscribe for more stories about the machines that dared to be different.